Hi, Eric. First of all, thank you so much for coming to our space here and speaking with us. It means an awful lot to me personally, and I think to the group as well, because you're going to be touching on some topics we have been wrestling with for months.
Yeah.
I saw your presentation you gave a couple weeks ago at the QAnon Institute, and you articulated everything that I've wanted to say about QAnon in a perfect way. And I think that you will do justice to this conversation and looking for a way forward in this world that we now co-inhabit with QAnon and with QAnon mythos. So to start off with, could you just give us a 30,000-foot view of QAnon, just the way it works?
Sure. I'm going to take a little second to kind of ramp up to it. Maybe I'll just reflect generally about it a little, and then I'll get to the account that you want, which is, so 2 years ago, I published High Weirdness, which was my dissertation for the book version of my dissertation, which I had done at Rice University in 2015 under Jeffrey Kripal. And it was looking at psychedelic and extraordinary visionary experience in the 1970s. And I was focusing on Terence McKenna, the mushroom bard. I was focusing on Philip K. Dick, science fiction writer, who didn't take psychedelics that much actually, but had a lot of sort of psychedelic-like experiences more in the psychopathological domain, but with a profound visionary religious dimension. And then finally, I talked about Robert Anton Wilson, who is a figure who's not that well known outside of certain underground currents, but was very important to me and many people who kind of get into this modern esoteric magic, reality creation, sort of, punk new age, you could almost call it. And what was interesting is when I published the book, I thought I would be talking mostly about Philip K. Dick, who was the most well-known, or maybe Terence McKenna, because there's this big psychedelic revival and he's very popular. But I ended up mostly talking about Robert Anton Wilson. And I did so because Robert Anton Wilson's work in the 1970s, which included his own experiences of paranormal realities, radical synchronicities, communications from extraterrestrial intelligences. Essentially, he lost the plot for about a year. He'd been asking for it with high-dose psychedelic esoterics, rituals, and just general weirdness. And it finally kind of broke, and he sort of lived in this fantastical universe for a while. And then he sort of made his way back to the kind of bemused and amused, skeptical, pragmatic pluralism that allowed him to sort of move between different frameworks of reference, including conspiratorial ones. He was always very interested in conspiracy theory, and he co-authored the great work of conspiracy theory in the 1970s, the novel Illuminatus, which really kind of took the Illuminati thread that was already existing inside conspiracy theory through the John Birch Society, and going back, of course, all the way to the beginnings of modern conspiracy theory with the French Revolution, where various traditionalists blamed the French Revolution on the Illuminati and their plans for sort of mystical world transformation. So Wilson took this stuff and just played with it in a way that we would now recognize in the light of QAnon in a very dangerous way. And at the time, it still had an edge of like, how far, what does he actually believe? How far is he taking this stuff? But there was a kind of glorious, goofy, sarcastic, anarchic prankster feel to it that gave it a kind of lightness, even as it was sometimes fairly dark stuff. I mean, he was really playing with conspiracy, the attractions of conspiracy, and particularly the relationship between conspiracy and the esoteric imagination, which is something that most people looking at QAnon, especially the mainstream, they don't really understand. They recognize the religious side of it, which is also important, but not so much the esoteric. So the book comes out, I've started giving talks, and I end up talking a lot about Robert Anton Wilson. Why? Because at that point, this was just before QAnon really started to flower, there were a number of things that happened kind of leading up to QAnon, and QAnon needs to be seen as a more recent version of a current that we can trace back at least to Pizzagate, and probably before that to the 4chaners and 8chaners who did Pepe Le Frog and all that kind of zone, because they're already starting to prank in a similar way, although Pizzagate is really the first breakthrough that has a real conspiratorial form. Pepe the Frog is not conspiratorial in that sense, but those strategies of like, am I being ironic or am I actually an evil racist? Oh, look, I'm using hilarious bits of pop culture iconography, and lo and behold, synchronistically, and the synchronicities were real, it actually turns out that this is a profound esoteric symbolism that goes back to ancient Egypt and has to do with the gods of chaos. Okay, well, now things are kind of weird. So there's a magical and esoteric dimension to Pepe the Frog that's really powerful. And if you guys are into this stuff, which, you know, whatever, it's like we have no choice. This is our reality now. It's not particularly pleasant, but if you're into it, you should totally see the documentary Feels Good Man, which is the story of Pepe the Frog, and you get it's great. It's one of the best. If in fact, if an alien came down and said, "So tell me, how is the internet changing human culture in, well, let's say unpredictable and unpleasant ways," I'd say, watch this. I mean, it has it all. It's an amazing piece of work. But in any case, there was a prankster quality to the alt-right and the alt-right leading up to the 2016 election. There was a prankster quality that was very similar to the anarchic libertarian hippie druggy pranksterism of Illuminatus. So I ended up talking about this stuff a lot more than I thought. And then as I was doing these conversations about conspiracy theory over the months, QAnon got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I was in this very weird position where I could understand its inner logic a lot better than a lot of commentators who just don't spend time with weird shit. And so I kind of got sort of not involved. I didn't do as much deep research as a lot of, you know, I really have a lot of respect for a lot of investigative journalists who really went, you know, following the numbers. Where is it coming from? How does it link up with various sort of power circles within the Republican Party, blah, 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 blah. So there's a lot of things to say about it. And here's the 30,000 miles up view is, well, I'll preface it by one thing. Remember how when Occupy happened? So Occupy was this largely grassroots amalgamation of variety of groups coming together in a kind of performative, symbolic, and discursive and on the ground way to push back against neoliberalism, globalization. And one of the things that people complained about Occupy at the time from the right or from the sort of, you know, centrist right was that they were not unified. They didn't have a message. They didn't have a single line. What was their argument? Where was their list of demands? We can't deal with these people. And that was one of the ways that Occupy got sort of branded by the mainstream media as like, well, their hearts are maybe in the right place, maybe, but they're stupid and they don't have an agenda. One of the interesting things about QAnon, and indeed part of the larger right-wing twists that we've gone into in the last few years, is that it is sort of the right version of that amalgamation, meaning that you cannot, in fact, most people err in their attempt to grapple with QAnon because they think it's one thing or essentially one thing. And you find this problem all across the contemporary political landscape, where there's a complex social phenomenon and everybody argues about what it really is. So the Trump supporter, who's the Trump supporter? Oh, it's the white working class white people who have been locked out of any sort of the fruits of globalization. No, it's the inherent deep current of racism in America. So right away, can I sympathize? No, no, well, it must be race. Well, some of these guys aren't racist, actually. They're, oh, what do I do? And everybody argues like there's one answer, but it's not. It's an amalgamation. We are in full complexity space. Here we go, have fun. QAnon is similar. So a lot of the public discourse about QAnon was like, what is it really? It's a game. It's a right-wing plot. It's racism. It's crazy religion. All these things. It's like it's all of it, because the conditions of complexity that we are in now, which involve the complexity of media, the breakdown of traditional zones of society, identities, the intensification of mediation, which is undermining our identities and senses of location, the complexity of the sort of breakdown of globalization as this kind of half-assed attempt at some sort of, the best that capitalism has to offer. And now we're living in the sort of ravaged, fibbing edges of it. These are very, very multivalent, ambiguous times. And QAnon really expresses the forms that power will take, some of the forms that power will take in our current condition, which is that they're amalgamations. They're not univocal, controlled, one meaning things. So how do I actually see that? What am I actually talking about? On the one hand, one thread is a kind of prankster, own the libs, nihilistic, online, Pepe the Frog, prank, essentially, where Pizzagate was clearly either seeded or immediately elaborated by this culture, and it did very well. So people were paying attention. We can prank this way and do well, or we can put forward our anti-mainstream media view in a more political sense and do well. So they were ready for the next move. So that is already kind of two threads. You have kind of a nihilistic prankster one, and you have a more, the way to gain power now is to undermine the mainstream media and to undermine faith in any kind of consensus truth. And part of that is nihilistic, and part of it is political in a hardball kind of way. I think that one of the grim things that we have to kind of acknowledge now is that everybody's playing hardball. Everybody, whatever game they had waiting in the wings. Not to say that there's a lot of games that are much more literally violent that luckily we haven't seen yet, although so we've seen little glimpses of it. So there's stacks of computer code exploits ready to like tear down electrical systems and things like that. So there's a lot of other stuff out there that we haven't seen. But in terms of the game of public discourse, in terms of the wrestling over consensus reality and who gets to claim consensus reality, or who gets to act as overlords over the fiefdoms that are created as consensus reality breaks down, in that game, that kind of discourse, public perception, cultural logic game, everybody's playing hardball. So QAnon comes out of that. But the other really major dimension is that there were actual alternative reality gamer people, or people who were familiar with those games in a deep, sophisticated, intentional way, becoming involved early on. And, when, how much of it, that's where you get kind of confusing, because a lot of these things, they start out and then they get appropriated by somebody else. And so it's not worth it to go down, well, who actually was in control? The point is that part of the reason it was so successful was that it was exploiting very powerful principles that are used as part of alternative reality games that you could explain using sociobiology if you wanted to. But we can also just kind of understand, certainly as esotericists, where we kind of like enjoy alternate reality models that involve symbols and connections and secret correspondences that we uncover ourselves. And in that very uncovering, we begin to move through different models of reality. And these seem to lead towards greater dimensions of secrets or facts, hidden facts, visionary truths about things that are very different than what the common man sees. And some of us play that game as esotericists as a sort of a kind of internal fantastic poetry. Some of us play it as true believers. Some of us play as kind of as gamers, like it's entertaining, it's fun, it makes life more interesting. So we should be familiar with some of the moves, but these were made more specific in the ways in which QAnon evolved. So what do I mean by that? Let's just take a few examples for that. One is that the QAnon did not tell you what the story was. They invited you in to become a co-creator of the story by doing research. And research involved watching a lot of videos and watching a lot of sites or looking at Instagram and putting the breadcrumbs together. So the whole idea of the Q drop, these enigmatic little parcels of suggestive information with the possibility that they referred to actual events, just seeded that mind, which again, we should be very familiar with as people interested in esotericism, a certain kind of hermeneutic overreading, just like the passage that Greg read of like everywhere there's an excess of signs, and that very excess can start to weave together as we create patterns. So basically, QAnon is set up to allow normies or people who are not familiar with this mode of thinking in any way at all to get that hit, to enjoy that particular feature. And then the story that's being unfolded as you do your own research, which means it sets up your own ahas. And this is one thing that one analysis, if we have time, I'll try to get, this is like one of my favorite. There's a lot of actually good material on QAnon. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it. But one of the best was this ARG designer who was breaking it down. He said, one of the things that's really powerful is not only is this encouraging people to pattern project and to see connections where there really aren't any, but it sets up aha moments. And because when you have an aha moment, you remember that it's yours. It's something you did. You're not reading it. You're not listening to someone like YouTube say, oh, well, did you ever think about the way that, what I'm trying to think of a good, synchronicity or I'm failing at the moment, but the way that some kind of connection comes together, if they just tell it to you, you're like, whatever. But if I discover it, if I put the pieces together and I have my aha moment, which again, we should all be familiar with as esotericists, then that becomes meaningful and intrinsic to my worldview and my sense of self in a much more intimate way. So you can see the way that the gaming aspect of it went into the specific ways that QAnon played out. So this was the main way that I was thinking about it for a long time, is kind of this combination of like right-wing trolls, nihilistic internet culture, undermine the mainstream media mixed with an ARG, and then the just sort of general apocalyptic sentiment and a kind of nascent religiosity or the occult turn, the occult turn that in Los Angeles we see as the popularity of witchcraft and fashion or whatever, or astrology's back or the tarot is super back. That's how we see it maybe in our worlds, but in the larger world, the occult return is manifesting in this kind of way, which has occult elements and then also has, of course, very strong Christian elements. And I guess that would be another really important thread. And some people have pointed this out, is just the way in which a certain kind of religious logic is unleashed with QAnon. And there's two dimensions of this. One is the Manichaeism, the splitting of reality into good and evil with capital G and capital E is, of course, bargain basement monotheism, and anytime it happens, you get a certain kind of energy going, because there's like, you're intensifying the polarity. You're making the two sides stronger and darker and brighter and louder and more cataclysmic. There's an almost essentially apocalyptic tendency within that aspect of monotheism, within the Manichaean split between good and evil, dark and light, that drives towards some kind of impossible battle or, resolution or conflict. And so by intensifying that Manichaeism, by intensifying the sense of evil, that no, we're not just dealing with garden variety evil here. No, these are satanic pedophiles, the whole story, or at least parts of the story, because the story went deep and far in many directions. Some were esoteric, some were paranormal, some were Christian. It was a mess, a chaos, an amalgamation of all of these different kind of tendencies with this profound religious dimension. But the one that really affected me, and I didn't really mention this when I talked about my own kind of personal journey with QAnon, or that's sort of a weird, sounds like I was in it, but was the fact that, and I suspect this is true for many people here too, that people in my communities, so yoga, psychedelics, kind of like, vaguely new age, or, seekers, noticeably, very noticeably at a certain point, and it was like January, before COVID, but not far before COVID, it just took off. So whatever was going on, whatever conditions these psyches were in, vis-a-vis media and information and gaming and their own life existential problems, but clearly it had a collective dimension because it was so pervasive, and it still is. I've thought a lot about it. It has a lot to do with alternative medicine, and there's some sort of stories about how, alternative medicine, anti-vax saw QAnon as a way to kind of put its own agenda forward. It's always been very proselytizing because it's political in the sense of wanting to change regulations. So there was a lot of activism that was driving the building of QAnon and the absorption of nominally progressive, let's just call them new age, yoga psychedelic people into the folds, and of course that world doesn't exactly tend to emphasize critical thinking. So it was very easy for people to follow their heart and their feelings, and to get sort of caught up with this worldview. But the other thing that I think was more on the sort of religious dimension of QAnon that's took me a little bit more time to notice is that they weren't just tuning into the evil that they hated. Bill Gates is, pharmaceutical industry trying to control us, the destruction of the planet, all the negative stuff that you can imagine, and somebody who's new age or sort of new consciousness would get into. There was also a light side, and that's the part that's a little harder to see from the outside. Is that entering into the Q community, depending on which angle you came in on, was also an introduction to a loving community who supported each other, and beyond that believed, and again in some of its dimensions, that the very thing that we're being called upon to do in this apocalyptic moment is to become beings of light, beings of goodness. It just so happens that we do that by recognizing this absolutely fantastical satanic evil. So there's this binary where it's precisely the extraordinary mytheme of the evil that allows me to become even more of a light worker, to apply to, and so we're all into the light. We're not going to, and in fact, what you're going to bring me data, you're going to tell me things about what's actually happening? No, thank you. That's just more muddledness. So it allowed this kind of thing, to happen inside these communities that I would not have guessed would have gone that much in these directions, even if I thought about all of those elements. This was a surprise, and of course a largely quite disheartening one. as friendships broke down, you know, like, no, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I can't handle this stuff anymore. You're being an idiot, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're all the kind of stuff. Again, maybe some of you have this happen. So those were all the elements that I mostly kind of thought about. I was talking about like the New Age thing. There is an actual religious dimension that combines a kind of Christian apocalypticism with a more esoteric light worker, pattern weaving sense, with a alternate reality game dimension, a nihilistic internet dimension, and a kind of right-wing trolling dimension. Okay, that's already a monster stew. But there's something else that happened that I have been more appreciative of more recently. And that is the way that despite, you know, given all of this, it still would not have done what it did were it not for one particular aspect of, let's call it our attention economy, the online, internet, self-promoting, entrepreneurial, influencer culture of Instagram and YouTube videos and Twitter follower feeds and all that kind of stuff, which is that this environment, and think about it like an ecology, you know, this environment, this ecology is like ripe for a certain kind of self-aggrandizing entrepreneurial self-promoter. So if we look at QAnon as a game, you have players, and the players I mostly have sympathy for. I don't get mad at them for being dumb or anything. I know too much about the history of religions. I've had too much weirdness in my life, including weird ideations to cast judgment on people who are just hunting, who are following someone's Instagram feed, who get into the game, who start to worry, who are concerned about the world for obvious reasons. Fine. But then you get up on these levels where people start going, oh yeah, it's make-a-buck time. And in fact, the more that I lie, or the more that I pretend to know exactly what I'm saying, or the more enthusiastic I get about it, the more followers I get, the more extreme I get, the more followers I get. So you get this feedback loop of influencers. So the QAnon shaman that really brought that whole kind of esoteric new age side of this QAnon story to become part of mainstream consciousness. If you follow his career, he's just sort of a standard new age, you know, Merkaba, mysticism, light worker, psychedelic person. And then at a certain point, he kind of turns. And I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's a manipulator. I actually think that he genuinely wants to make the world better, and that he's doing his best he can with not, you know, a full deck of cards necessarily, but he's not a bad guy. And it's important to mention that because even good guys or girls take advantage of the way that the information ecology invites us to magnify our personal power, our ego, our sense of influence through its circulations and mediations. It's a very, very tempting thing to get into. I mean, I have to wrestle with it because people want me to do things. So I'm like, oh, I guess I'm important now. And oh, I go, okay, well, this is, you know, and you're like, okay, whoa, what's going on here? And so you have suddenly all these people who otherwise would maybe be outside of that power. They don't have the education, they don't have the skills, they don't have the connections, they're poor, they live in some place that gives them no social mobility, and suddenly they can, by tapping into the right information things, can really magnify these stories. So QAnon became like just this golden ticket for a million influencers. And that's the part that I hadn't quite seen in my earlier thing, where I was trying to think of like, what are all the elements and influences of the culture itself? And then it's like all those things were there, and then they were amplified in a situation where people, for a variety of reasons, were using social media to try to connect. And I think the final thing I'll say there, I'm sorry I've just been giving this riff, but I've been thinking about this for a long time, so it's easier just to get it all out there. The final thing that was one of the more enigmatic aspects of it that I had missed, but again, I think I first read about this in The Atlantic, which did a pretty good job of doing like a little package on QAnon at one point. I have a lot of issues with the secular representations of QAnon because they don't understand religion at all. They don't understand esotericism. They don't have sympathy for religious people or religious thought. And so it's just kind of irritating. But you got to read those guys because they're usually the people who are doing the investigative journalism. And what this one article pointed to was this whole other zone of QAnon that I had noticed, which was the Instagram QAnon, which was largely done by women. And it was, some people call it like the pastel QAnon, because it wasn't at all like, evil child molesters. I mean, it might say save the children or something, but it was much more about join our community. And there's these drops and this is how it works. And it's like very welcoming and very, it has that kind of like whatever mainstream idea of a certain sort of feminine sociality. And very, inviting and kind of fun. And, like, woof, okay. So it's just that the ecology that we're in, which has never existed before, which nobody really has a handle on, nobody really can entirely control, but it can be gamed really hard from multiple directions, is also part of the picture. So even as there's some serious gaming going on, meaning not just alternative reality games, but hardcore players with lots of money who can fund lots of things. And there was definitely cash pushing this thing forward, right-wing cash, crazy Christian cash, crazy New Age cash was helping this thing go forward. It was being gamed, but there is also a grassroots information ecology amplification that's going on that is tapping into some of the values we all hold dear. We can't we shouldn't try to separate ourselves entirely from at least a lot of the people who went along for the ride. I mean, I reserve more ire for the manipulators and controllers, and it is always important to make that distinction. But anyway, here we are. And while I'm happy to go over that kind of grim and gruesome tale, talk about the history of conspiracy theory, talk about other reasons this might have happened, I'm more interested now in now what do we do? Like maybe this version kind of dissipates, sort of, even though it's not really clear, jury's out, but some version of this, some mutation or new line, is just whatever, it's going to happen. And what do we do? Is there some other way? Is there an alternate reality game? A pronoia game, let's actually try to have fun and save the planet before we die game. That's like so cool and weird and like, wow, new technologies, ancient indigenous practices, people from all over the world coming together. Woo! Like, is there some way to game that? It's hard because the evil is different. It's harder to locate evil in a lot of ways, or there's more arguments about where you locate evil. But that's sort of where I'm really interested in. I don't have any real idea what that would look like and how we might think about it going forward.
One thing I noticed kind of in my own journey and my own experiences in some of those intersectional areas, at the Chacruna talk, obviously in these various communities, there is the awareness now that QAnon has taken something from them and caused some rifts. And but I wasn't seeing a whole lot of I guess anybody in any of the QAnon spaces themselves. You see a lot on major social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, you see people fighting over it, calling it stupid or calling it dumb or whatever, and not really understanding the underlying concepts that you spoke to. But the one place I did not see any of that, or at least not initially, I'm seeing a little bit of that now, was any actual outreach being done maybe on the same level as QAnon in their spaces. That was something I did not see being done. Is that something that is being discussed in any of these communities?
Yeah, not very well. I mean, I'm even stuck at just what do you do with the family member, or what do you do with the individual, let alone like anything like an outreach. The stuff that heartened me the most were, some videos. I think some of them were TikToks from people who had been. There was one that I remember in particular who was from a woman who had been in like a white pride racist nationalist cult culture, whatever you want to call it, and who, thought of herself as being someone who had been, ensorcelled and then was outside the cult, that, and it was this very tender, vulnerable thing about like how hard it is to make that transition. And my gut told me that a lot of the people who would be on the fence after all this, who would go, wow, nothing happened after the attack on the Capitol. Trump didn't come in on a white horse and throw everybody in jail, chop off everybody's heads. That the people who would be able to speak to those people the most are other people who have gone through that process, because the amount of shame and confusion and just embarrassment or whatever that you would have would be really significant in a way that the last thing you want to hear is even the most sympathetic and gentle person on the "I told you so" side saying, "I told you so." So I was always a little bit like, I don't even know what outreach, might mean, but I was extremely disappointed. And here we might get into a somewhat, these are not my final thoughts on this matter, but I was disheartened at the degree of anger and ferocious forms of unforgiving mockery, not even mockery, but mockery I could kind of understand, but just like hatred for people who just had gone along for the ride, not for the people who are manipulating it, not for the people up the chain, not the source characters, not the people who are actually doing the Q drops, but just for your average person who got caught up in it. And that bothered me for a number of reasons. One, again, I thought it showed a simplicity about religion and how religion operates and how visionary experience and mythology can kind of take over your mind for a little while, and maybe not even for bad reasons, but can raise a lot of problems, and that we need to have sympathy for people, particularly people who are just trying to navigate a very confusing world. But I didn't see a lot of that. And as I continue to look out on our contemporary media landscape, I'm somewhat terrified that we are now going to get to go in the other direction and have an extremely censorious media, I don't know what to call it, blanketing that will cause more problems than it solves, and is being motivated not at all what it looks like. We could talk more about that if you want to. But for me, the inability to go, okay, QAnon happened, let's try to go forward. These are ordinary people, a lot of them, most of them, and let's try to figure it out, folks. That polarization that just continued in the face of that was very disheartening. So I don't feel that there was outreach. I don't know anybody other than a few of these examples of people who had, come out of other sort of right-wing cults or extreme positions politically, and come out and said like, hey, you can make it to the other side, and da da da. Beyond that, I haven't seen very much, and I don't really know what's happening.
I guess a question would be, what responsibility do you feel that we have in these various communities to speak truth to our own roots, our own esotericism, the spirituality, those things that a lot of times are twisted or used by the manipulators to, I see PRS material in some of those spaces, and it's being used for what I would consider kind of the antithetical purpose. And I think when there aren't voices there, how do we address responsibility within this?
That's a very good question. And I'm just going to be riffing. I don't have a coherent answer. I think I'm still kind of in shock about how all these different undergrounds that had been part of my life and mind and experience throughout my life since I was a teenager, how they've all become part of the mainstream. And even the metaphors don't work anymore. There is no underground. There is no mainstream. It's, we're just in this other thing that we don't really have good language for. And one of the things that thing does is it eats up everything, especially anything that has any kind of charge. And that charge might be just because it's inherently groovy, like an alchemical image, or because it's been something that's been loaded with a lot of meaning and juice by a lot of people over time, like the story of Jack Parsons, which has been like, who other than weird occult people and like LA fringies would care about this story for the whole life of the story until it suddenly becomes generally relevant and somehow like generally significant. That's an interesting example. So anyway, how do you deal with that when you are actually invested in those currents, when you see it be sort of used and abused? I'm not really sure. I want to get to the responsibility question in a second, but let's just stay with this one now, which is that in some sense, it feels to me like part of what's happening, and it might be entirely bad, and it might be part of some world process that's actually kind of interesting and has something in it, which is just that all the secrets are out. And hopefully there aren't all of our personal secrets out, although it increasingly looks like that's where we're going. And it may be the case that people who are being born today will not think the way that we do about secrecy and privacy, and on a fundamental level. Already people in your generation, Nicholas, think differently about certain things than I do on a fundamental level, not just a kind of cognitive model level. So that I think that means that for those paths that have relied on the performative psychological dynamic of secrets to make things happen, that's in for it's a rough ride. I think you can still have secrets. I have no doubt that there are some amazing things going on that aren't online, that are done locally through messages that involve mysteries and maybe drugs and powerful rituals and things that are hidden. So I have no doubt that secrets continue, and that they will continue in people's individual lives. But the way in which cultural forms, initiatory societies, books, media, symbolism, the way that those things have held certain kinds of secrets, the game is not over, but it's just that the secret's out. We know how to do this. If you want to, you can go find Illuminati imagery inside of whatever, hip hop videos. Where did it come from? Why is it there? It's there, I think, right? Well, it sure seems like somewhere along the way, people were like, hey, let's throw this stuff in because it's fun. It gets us more attention. It screws with the fans. It's just good stuff. That's what you do if you play with media, if you play with minds and media and hearts and energy and information. So it doesn't matter that it's meaningless, because the making of the meaning by seeding a popular video with esoteric symbolism, knowing that all those sort of hermeneutic over the top conspiracy esotericists will just take to it like flies to honey, that you're just playing with the media more. So in a way, it's completely nihilistic. It has nothing to do with what these images are about. It has nothing to do with internal transformation. It maybe has something to do with the idea of secrets or other stories or other dimensions of history or something. And that kind of like goofy, cheesy pulp dimension was always part of esotericism, at least in the post-war period. But really, I think certainly back in the 19th century, where there's sort of a sleazy exploitation kind of garish quality to the culture that also is connected with things that are much more profound or erudite or sophisticated or even genteel in some ways. But that pop culture side of it is just much more, you know, in our face. So it's just kind of the world we live. We just got to, you know, you just accept it. I mean, one of the sad things about that is that it's like if I had what would otherwise be a cool synchronicity where I was just, you know, thinking about alchemy, and then I see some image from Atalanta Fugians that was part of a video, I would go, whoa. And now I'm like, yeah, it's just there. It's just part of the landscape. It's disenchanted. And that's what modernity is in a lot of ways. It's like this, it disenchants and reenchants, disenchants the reenchantment. It's this like, it's not completely disenchanted by any means. We wouldn't be here if it was, because we have all found ways into enchantment. But that's one of the ways that it eats up enchantment. But the question of responsibility, that's more interesting. I really don't know what to say about that, because my experience of things is that the more that I try to describe, the more that I try to characterize where I'm coming from, that is based on the ways in which I have been a student of the secrets and of whatever altered states or consciousness practices and history and mythology, that it doesn't always translate very well. And you know, how do you approach the problems of translation in a time when we're all sort of, on one level, we're all woven together more, and on another level, everybody's going into their own private Idaho? I'm not really sure. I do think that it's probably, particularly given what I just said about secrecy, it's probably better to just be overt and clear in your communications, even if it's against your tendencies, in terms of just, yes, I'm a psychedelic person. Yes, I'm an esoteric person. Yes, I practice magic. Yes, I do the tarot. And no, I don't buy that. And no, I don't think that's the way to do it. And no, I'm not a fuzzy thinker. No, I respect science. Whatever the mixture of positions that you might have, it does seem that if you care for this material, that it is kind of upon you in a way to take a public stance about it in a way. And that was, partly what's so nice about what PRS is doing now, where there's a public quality to the programs that, were happening certainly live before, and I assume are continuing to happen in this other space, that had a different feel to earlier generations, where it was still like, even if it's a public talk, there's a sense of a school with a capital S. And it's kind of schools out now. It's like, it's just one big crazy summer. And, I think being out in that way is important. And it's also important because one of the other unfortunate things about the information ecology as a site of esoteric transmission is that the old ways of discovery and secrecy and initiation and having to know somebody and finding like whatever and being scared when you cross when you first come to PRS for the first time and you're going to go to a talk on alchemy and you're like, what kind of weird people are here? And like all of that kind of stuff that those of us of an older generation could probably relate to becomes increasingly less at play in a world where everything is available, where there is no secrecy. You can find out incredible amounts about extremely marginal, traditionalist witchcraft circles in England in the early 1960s without that much work. Like I can just go and find that in 10, 15 minutes. So that whole logic has changed. And one of the bad things about that, it means that the younger people who are coming in, who are attracted to it, who it resonates with, or they like the imagery, or they like the idea of it, is that there's no mechanism for any kind of transmission over time that's based on concrete locality, people of a different generation, or even just the kind of social initiatory process of entering into particular kinds of groups. Instead, it's just kind of all available. So, you know, you might as well represent what you're doing, because maybe that attracts people who are smart enough to recognize that their own story about what witchcraft is, or their own story about what tarot is when you're 19 years old and you've just read some books and watched a bunch of YouTube videos, probably isn't quite the same thing as it could be or will be as you grow with this, and that you can actually learn from people, not necessarily older people, but just people who are more, you know, more into it. Because if all of those transmission lines break down, and believe me, I'm not saying like there should be a, you know, a university professor or like, you know, the leader of the group who's teaching everyone. I don't mean that. I mean, when I think back to the people I learned from, some of them were crazy, far out characters, but they were just so deep in their trip, and I had to work hard or be very lucky to find them. So there was something charged about whatever information they gave me, in a way that like, oh, I like this YouTube video guy is pretty good. He's really into being the particular esoteric, magical, Crowleyan, post-Crowleyan, you know, coyote wizard that I'm interested in. That guy's already selling himself as that. It's just, it's like that whole situation has kind of been profaned. So it feels like, why not be out? So anyway, I don't know if that exactly addresses the question of responsibility, but that's what came up.
Then what opportunities do you see in terms of the mythopoetic tradition that is in place here? What tools do we have available to get a little crazy ourselves, to get a little weird ourselves in working in these spaces? Does that open up some new frontiers that you can see?
Yeah, I feel like it does. I mean, it seems very fragmented. I mean, even looking at your screen, Nicholas, I was reminded of a certain phase of the cultural imaginary in the 1970s, where you had this admittedly utopian but still rather attractive blend of new technologies and organic architectures, a mixture of cosmic and indigenous, a sort of sense of a kind of human scale of family that is also transmorgified into otherness and weirdness because we're no longer human. This kind of sweet spot. And it's totally just in fantasy and literature and architecture and imagery and movies. Didn't happen that much. I think some communes went in that direction. Some pagan groups went in that direction. But it reminded me that it does seem that there is a kind of possibility of a really fun global imagination of a future that is both Terran and technological and, you know, multi-generational and extremely diverse. But to actually imagine that really working, so much has to happen on the left that I'm just not sure how it's going to happen. But that's maybe not our problem. Maybe part of the thing that we can do is just begin to sort of build those visions in whatever media that we have, some sense of like what would be a kind of smart mythopoetic religiosity that is resonant with a world on the brink of climate change and on new technologies, and where mainstream consensus reality is breaking down. So why not go for it? Maybe there is a way of imagining something where the kinds of dissension that happen on the left or in progressive circles, or at least in environmentalist circles, could somehow overcome itself long enough to be able to attach or to desire a larger, more collective project. And that's a strange thing about our moment. And it's hard when you say left and right, because it's not even really the right language, but I'm just going to, go with it for the moment, is that I think a lot of people really sense the need for some kind of mythopoetics or sense of feeling or sense of possibility that allows multiple perspectives to kind of come together and resonate again, to be able to get behind a kind of flag, and if you will. But it's hard to see where that comes from. And so in a way, since nobody knows that recognizing the way that there are aspects of the esoteric tradition and the mythopoetic traditions that it comes out of, or which related to, that speak to our kind of moment, where there is an acknowledgement of the archaic and the traditional, but not a simply reactionary refusal to new forms of life and new forms of imagination. To my mind, that a certain kind of esotericism very much supports that kind of view, as well as a sort of kind of hipness around media. There's a certain kind of fun, a certain kind of flash that you see in contemporary esoteric media that means it translates well, it works well in that environment. And we can see the way that if you look at QAnon, it's like, wow, they did a really good job of that. What's a version of that that's not a finite Manichaean game, but something more like an infinite game? And, the thinker Kars has this great idea about the difference between a finite game and an infinite game. And the problem with the world as we're going forward is that if the finite game dominates, it's very hard to imagine how rivalrous dynamics do not essentially create an existential event one way or another. Meaning that as long as the idea is that there's that one group only is going to win over another, or there's some finite source that they're going to be able to claim, that it's very hard to imagine how that doesn't ultimately create extremely intense problems for us. So if that's not the game, what's the only other game is something like the infinite game, which just means the whole point of the game is to keep playing the game. It may even be a vacuous game sometimes, or whatever, but it's like, don't go to end the game by grabbing the flag, because then that's the end. You got to keep playing the game. It's almost like the psychedelic sense of like, no, just keep it going, don't look in the void, and there's something to that kind of flavor that feels like I would love to see that happen. But in order for that to happen, people have to start, and I don't know how this happens. I don't know how I do it in my own life. We have to just stop doom scrolling all the time. We have to stop being completely burdened by the realities that we're perfectly understandably terrified by and burdened by and depressed by and despairing by. It's like, if we just carry that energy, the best we can hope for is a kind of stoic resolve, in the face of breakdown or meltdown. But it feels to me that like we're not that far from some kind of last ditch turn where people recognize that there's still a way to celebrate, dream together, desire together. I don't know what it looks like. I'm not going to do it. It's not going to be my language that does it. But it does feel that the esoteric, that it's not an accident that esotericism and psychedelics and yoga and all the stuff we're talking about is so part of the mainstream now. It's not just because it's groovy, so capitalism can take advantage of it, although it's partly that. It does seem that it's almost like a self-inoculating kind of process whereby people learn to live in a more magical reality. And one way of looking at QAnon is that, like, if you're just living in a normal secular reality, and then you first crack through that other world and you look around and you realize what on some maybe unconscious or not thoroughly thought through level, you recognize how dire the situation is and how weird the manipulation and manifestation of mind has become in the age of the internet. Your reaction is some kind of splitting where you project the shadow, you hold on to the light, and you grab onto the nearest mythology that makes sense of that, particularly one that's attached to people who maybe are even nice to you or kind to you. That makes sense, but maybe this is something like an initiatory process as we go farther and farther into something where we need to be able to be multimodal thinkers, where we can operate in a mystical worldview or a visionary worldview and a scientific worldview and a materialist worldview and an ecological worldview, and be able to really play that, juggle that, like jugglers. Like that's the infinite game. The infinite game is the juggler who keeps throwing another thing in the juggling field. You're like, oh, okay, here we go again. Oh boy, you gotta do all these, da da da. And that is like a kind of skill set to emulate if we're kind of moving forward in the kind of vision you're talking about.
That is all of the questions I had. So I'd like to open it up for group discussion here. If people would just like to raise their hands, either live or virtually, I think there's a button under the reaction section. Thank you so much, Erik, for your insights there.
Great.
Want to dive right in? I guess I do have a few more questions if nobody else does, but I'd like to open this up because I've been.
You just talk. You have a question.
I have a question. All right. I don't know if it's a question or what it is, but first of all, Erik, thank you very much for all of that. It was, you kind of put some things in perspective for me that I was unable to put together. And so thank you for that. And you've got me whirling right now about how is it possible that when you said that the secrets are out, and when I look at what it is that we're reading, this stuff is, some of it's thousands of years old and some of it's hundreds of years old, and maybe we're on the cusp of a new esotericism. Is it possible that we are at the very, very beginning of something entirely new? And you started to speak to that right at the very end, something that includes science and religion and the natural world and everything else. I can't help but think that the world is aching for something that goes beyond what we already have, this new level. And maybe QAnon is maybe it's possible that QAnon is the beating the hornet's nest, if you will, to bring about something that's new and greater and even more powerful, and that brings everyone together. I have one more comment. This notion that it's not a notion, it's the truth, that the believers of QAnon, family members, we've just, this is wrong, we're not going to have anything to do with you. It's because nobody knows what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody, and I mean, it's just such a mind fuck that nobody knows where to put it or what to do with it, and so they don't want to hear about it. It's confusing. So anyhow, I wanted to add that to my comment. But is it possible that something new is wanting to emerge?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that kind of that newness is always in the picture in some sense, and I think it's not really our. I think like a lot of people, I wrestle with despair or hopelessness, and it's also, I don't think quite our, I would say our right, but that there's some ways in which all that is good about our lives and good about life demands us a sense of openness towards possibility, even in very dark circumstances. I cannot but look at our circumstances as pretty dark. What it looks like on the far side, I think that what you're talking about happens, it's going to be pretty unrecognizable as such.
Mm-hmm.
Not like the way new age people talked about, oh, it's a new paradigm and it involves quantum physics and this and yoga and whatever. And you're like, no, it's not like that. It's something like on another level or another dimension or another kind of technology. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it looks like. In a way, I'm kind of flustered because I don't really know how to address that possibility other than keeping it radically open. And in a way, keeping that possibility open, or possibilities in general open, is itself a kind of remarkable work at some point in the way, given the ways in which both the reality of the situation, but also the way that the media environment itself is driving us towards a certain kind of doom. Because there's something we're scrolling when we're doom scrolling. Somebody's making a dime off that. So it's not just that we're in a dire situation, it's that we're also caught up in a collective obsession with a kind of reality confrontation that by its very nature crushes out possibility. So I think it's part of our obligation, in a way, is not necessarily to be, Pollyannish, but to just keep open the sense of possibility on that scale, recognizing that you don't know what it looks like, right, or what it, and that's part of the challenge. It can't be a new paradigm that's some particular form. It has to be, what then becomes kind of admirable about QAnon was how many, in some ways, pretty different kinds of people it was able to weave together into a very strikingly directed kind of worldview. And what is that? What's a version of that? That's the ecological, form of that, the just form of something like that. And
it's also not, I'm hearing you speak about QAnon in the past tense, and yet it's still something that's projecting forward. It's
still going forward, and it's still going to, it'll be really interesting to see whether it mutates or it gets like another layer that then gives it a new name, because the actual Q drops themselves, that's no longer sustainable. But the mythology is, so does it still being the pedophile and the adrenochrome, or do things just keep coming and going and it just moves forward? I think, and back to the other question about esotericism, is I think that part of what actually, in terms of responsibility or how to represent, how to talk about it, how to be about in public, is to show that, whatever your particular interest in science is, that it's not about the feverish, like, it's all the mystery, here I go, I'm going to put all the pieces together. It's about a kind of, poetic, spiritual, psychological, mythopoetic realm of experience that doesn't mean you leave your brain at the door, to show that critical thinking goes into this space as well, is really key at this point, because otherwise you're just going, sorry about those guys. It's tough. I mean, I've had to question some of my stuff, the things I write about, because I'm like, well, was that safe? Was that, now do we have to be a little more concerned about what people will do with it? It's almost like we have to assume that everybody, this is one way I've been thinking about lately, we have to kind of assume that everybody, including ourselves, is closer to mental illness than we once thought. And I think that's partly true, that our current conditions do make things more labile that way. I also think it's sort of maybe always true and that part of what draws us to religion and esotericism is a way to creatively dance with our own madness at 1 or 2 or 3 removes. But that this question of responsibility is also about recognizing that people are really ready to crack. And the problem is that there's so many actors who not only don't care about that, they're actually exploiting it. But if you're not on that game, what else can you do other than try to, as best you can, keep the field of sanity clear, crisp, well-maintained through dialogue, through criticism, whatever else you do, you keep that going very bright and clean, because there's a lot of things that are drawing people into darker worlds that lead towards that kind of, those kinds of breaks, it seems like. Any other questions?
I have a question. Oh, sorry, somebody else wanted to jump
No,
in?
go ahead.
Okay.
You're up.
So I heard you say that the Q drops are no longer, what did you say? Viable? Why is that? And so I've never seen any of the QAnon posts, so I don't even know how it works, other than what I've heard from you tonight. So why are they no longer viable?
Maybe I'm going to ask somebody else, because I have to admit I have not been tracking what exactly has happened since the inauguration. Nicholas, you want to give us a drop?
Yeah, there haven't been any since, I believe, December 20th, somewhere in there. The messages that form one part of QAnon, because it's just one part.
Wait, excuse me, Nicholas, there haven't been any drops since December 20th?
Yeah, correct. Those are the messages that they decode, and you know, that's part of the myth-making process, and it's part of connecting previous parts of the conspiracies together. And there haven't been any new ones. There are rumors and conspiracies for why that may be. There have been rumors of people who are running it. There's ties to 8kun and some of the other sites, and the site operators were, I believe, brought over to the United States for some hearings with the Senate at some point. So they're saying, oh, well, maybe the person who was behind that, if it was one person, is no longer doing that. But there hasn't been anything. So right now is an interesting time. I think, Eric, you'd agree, because it seems like it's a weird period.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a little bit about people talking about it, or there was some interesting audio that's been posted on people, within Q groups, sort of talking about it, and well, maybe we got hosed, or what's going on, and so it's a liminal time for it. And again, but it does, in a way, it almost doesn't matter whether it comes back in this form or some other kind of related form. We're going to be able to see that game going. And I'm afraid, frankly, that some forms that the current administration will take will only intensify certain kinds of paranoia around control, and that we just get into another version of this game that will be even more alienating for those of us in between than the one before. And so,
but isn't all of it about control? Isn't the QAnon piece about control as well?
To a degree, although, well, that's a good question. It's a good thing to think about. I think the control is one of the main problems to think about in the whole post-war period. Like when cybernetics comes out of World War II, cybernetics is a science of communication and control. And cybernetics in the 1950s is seen as like a mechanism that is able to explain how humans learn, how technologies learn, and how you can sort of construct or guide systems, which include both natural systems like ecology and systems like finance and systems like information flow in a telephone network, and how those systems can be controlled. So the problem of control becomes part of our ambient world. You know, when William S. Burroughs thinks about it, he's thinking about it on all these multiple levels. And it's also a really core question about who we are, because we're like, am I in control? Am I making this decision? Am I really an agent? And that creepy feeling when you feel like you thought you were being an agent, but you're actually not. Something else was like, your impulse was controlling you, or the ad was controlling you, or you did it naturally, or the unconscious did it, or whatever. And we kind of play on that edge, like where's kind of control. So control is a really important category that helps you, that is a key towards understanding the dynamics of the contemporary world. Also, control is at the heart of conspiracy theory. The whole idea is that seemingly random events or seemingly conflicting events are actually being controlled and manipulated from a single point of origin. Huh. So when I'm a conspiracy, so that's a conspiracy theory. So against that, you might say, no, it's a grassroots phenomenon. It's not being controlled from on top, from on high. There's just lots of people who are involved, are coming to it for their own reasons and in their own unique ways. And together they form together, and something happens that's out of everybody's control. And you have these two kind of models of history, if you will, that are fighting, or that actual history emerges somewhere in between. And so while it's important to think about control, if you think about control too much, you tend towards this either a conspiratorial view or a kind of a different kind of fantasy, which is that technocrats can solve the problem. That, oh no, we just need really, really bright people in the, whatever, in the World Health Organization, and that, like, Bill Gates is going to take care of us, because it's sort of the flip side of the same thing, is that the technocrats, they have the wisdom to be able to control the system. So those are both things that lie down the zone of like attributing too much control. If you attribute too much chaos, then you no longer recognize or acknowledge the degree to which we are manipulated. We're manipulated by advertising, we're manipulated by our upbringing, manipulated by our parents, manipulated by our boss, manipulated by the financial system. There's all these ways in which we actually are manipulated. So we're it's a tight spot. And there's actually spiritual analogs. You can talk about it in terms of necessity and spontaneity, is an experience of kind of like reality, like, oh, everything is just the way it is, just perfectly. It's actually all set up. It's all there, versus like, it's just free play. It's just happening. There's no guide, so there's even in kind of spiritual experience, there's a sort of tension here. But to just take it with the Q, you asked about QAnon, that's in a way both the problem and the opportunity about how we think about it. Some people want to say it's all controlled. It's a right-wing top-down plot that was cleverly using gaming technology and control over media in order to get this thing going and to hoodwink the masses. Okay, partly. Or, well, it was just some pranksters on this board. It just kind of got out of hand, and then all these different people came along, took advantage of it. They started to riff on it their own. And, it was a time of polarization, and then everybody was inside because of COVID, and we're all on the internet all the time, and it's rotting our minds. And so it just kind of happened. Yeah, there's some truth there too. So when we're looking at current events and we want to be true to power, true to recognizing power and how power operates, including the way that it hides itself, we have to think about control. But if we think about control too much, I believe, we not only are incorrect a lot because we don't acknowledge how much contingency, chaos, and let us not forget, total fuck ups define human reality, including human reality at the top of the scale. What we think we're like, the people who run conspiracies are somehow different than all the other humans who run all the institutions you actually know about. This is my favorite argument against conspiracy theories. Like, I just go like this. Hey guys, take it. What institutions do you actually know about? It could be anything. University, your family, place you work, the club you're at, your church, doesn't matter. Whatever you know, anything you know about. How does it work? What do you got? You got rivalry, gossip, agendas, idiots getting more power than they deserve. The good people quit. It's a mess, right? Do you really think that the people who staff the CIA or whatever the nefarious, the Illuminati, are like different people? They're like this other race of people that don't do that in their institutions. It's absurd. It's just absurd on the face of it. Doesn't mean that there is manipulation. Doesn't mean that we're not being hoodwinked. Doesn't mean that there aren't some very nasty things that are being used, that there are control, levels of control over mind, over technology, finance, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but that kind of Manichaean projection of the great controller. So when we think about control, I think about it like we're in between control and chaos. And you were dancing between control and chaos on an individual level, on a societal level, on a historical level, and too much control, time for some chaos. Too much chaos, time for some control. That's kind of the middle way that I think a lot of this stuff is asking us to be. And I mean that is spiritually true as well. All right, got hands up. I think Logan was number one. Logan.
Wow, I'm number one. Thank you.
Number one. What are you cooking up in that photo, Logan?
Well, what do you think it is? Well, it's chicken.
Oh.
I was grilling at a beach house for all of my friends who were those were during the days when I was living in Portland a couple years ago.
Okay, there you go. Nice shirt too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was really rocking my grandpa chic that day. So Erik, oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us tonight. I have not only been inspired by your wisdom, but I'm not, well, I suppose what I'm trying to grapple together is a question, and maybe I'll get there if I just sort of start talking. But I mean, sometimes when I come into PRS, and everyone sort of knows this, is I get ideas and I just sort of like regurgitate them out of things that made me think of something else and in relation to that or whatever. I have also been thinking a lot about how to resolve this problem, maybe not even a problem, but the epidemic of loneliness in our current, where we are in our line in history, and how the internet can create this space that allows everyone to come together. I think I'm thinking now about something that Jeffrey Alteris said, was that, we're looking, like, people are looking for something that's greater than themselves. And I would like to phrase that differently and say that we are looking to confirm our suspicions of what already is. And pardon me if that sounds a little bit metaphysical, but I keep going back to that because something that I asked the group in one of our earlier talks was, what is truth? And what can it be? And the conclusion that I came to was that it is something that is absolutely indivisible. And I have to constantly remind myself when people are doing things that I don't necessarily agree with, that they are conscious And that's it. That they are one song in the chorus of all of us. And when I think about, some sort of, I don't know, getting behind the flag, as it were, like a sense of almost like benign nationalism, I keep thinking about consciousness. I keep thinking about how we define it and how we go. And this sense of loneliness that seems to has really taken hold, and we're reaching out and we're trying to find this connection and to find this meaning. We're focused in on places that are not necessarily benefiting us. I mean, they're benefiting us in the sense that, we're finding a community and a sense of togetherness. But when it comes to a head, where it becomes violent, and that becomes the group dynamic, that it's consciousness attacking itself.
Yeah, well, that sounds like, welcome to history.
Yeah.
Consciousness attacking itself. And I mean, one thing it's, I think, helpful to remember is that, this didn't just like happen out of nowhere.
Right.
That we're at a certain point in the mutation of whatever the heck made human beings happen. And then after 95% of their lives hanging around hunting and gathering, whatever happened to make the agricultural revolution take off, and you start to develop the state and writing and standing armies and imperial forms and religion with a capital R, and technology develops, globalization, colonialism, science, like it's a long, weird, rumbling, increasingly intensifying ride. And I think sometimes we feel, understandably panicked by this, isolated by it, because all these forms of whatever slight forms of human collectivity we manage to make up as this monster, as this Babylon beast expands. And I don't want to insult Babylon with that, so maybe I should revise it. But as this sort of, techno-civilizational beast rolls forward, they get torn apart, and so then we're oh God, we're alone again, reaching out again. And then now we have this global mechanism that is precisely designed to draw our loneliness into these virtual connections that in many ways, not all, but in many ways don't feed us, and in fact actually intensify the problem. So we're in this kind of weird loop. But that weird loop, those loops, they go back. It's not just like, oh, everything was groovy and then my life showed up and things started to get grim. And I think part of what's happening, especially in America, is that we're really not used to history in our face. We haven't had wars on our soil. So while the war, Vietnam's a bummer, Afghanistan's a bummer, Iraq's a bummer. It's not even a bummer. It's a fucking nightmare. But it's not quite in our face in the way that, World War II in Germany or London is in your face. And history's in our face now. And it looks a little different. It's more confusing. But loneliness is definitely a part of it. And a lot of people have talked about QAnon and other kinds of weird cultural phenomena and weird mental illness problems in terms of loneliness, what loneliness does and how it draws us forward. And I don't know what to do about that. I mean, what do you say to that? Because there's so many forces that are kind of creating this space. The space of loneliness. But it does seem that one element of spiritual practice is is to coming to terms with your own, not solitude exactly, but your own singularity. That, you know, at the end of the day, you know, you die alone. And if you're spiritually called, you prepare to be that one who dies alone and is okay with it. This is not saying like you shouldn't feel lonely, or wouldn't it be better if we had organic communities where people felt connected? Absolutely. That's how human beings should live. I'll even make that claim. That's what we're designed to do. And indeed, part of the problem is that we're still playing these old programs, except now on this totally different scale of stage, that we're not actually mutating the right way for our technological environment. But I am saying that one thing that the mysteries have for us, whether we're thinking esotericism or meditation or Tai Chi or whatever, is that they open up a space for us to kind of be full in our solitude, or be woven into a community of consciousness that isn't directly socialized. And that in some ways that's a really powerful thing, because even if it's true that there are much more positive forms of social life than the ones that we try to navigate through now, there's mostly something a little oppressive about them as well. You know, there is no ideal family. You know, there's a rich multi-dimensional family living in the same town with layers, and you know your grandmother and you know your aunt and all that kind of stuff. That's cool, but it's also a bit oppressive. And there's something very freeing about moving to the city if you come from a situation like that. But then you have to deal with the city and the fact that you're surrounded by all these people, but you're terribly alone. In a way, the internet is just a big global city. We're surrounded by all these people, but we're so aware of their lives and how great their lives are. And my life is not so great, and I'm feeling lonely. They seem connected. And, you know, there's that envy or that sense of emptiness, that sense of grasping, that sense of samsara is absolutely just part of the thing. It's designed to do that. So your loneliness isn't like your responsibility. It's in a way, a fact that is also kind of exploited by the environment you're in. And that one thing you can try to do, and, you know, like most of us, you'll probably only do an okay job at it, certainly including myself, is to grab the bull by the horns and sit in your loneliness and become friendly with your loneliness. And on the far side of that, there's something else that can happen that actually often lets people have different kinds of relationships with other people, where you're almost like, I see you in your loneliness. And we can connect and be friends and be maybe even, you know, best friends, but in a different way, without the grasping that comes from when you're socializing based on that need. So it actually helps you socialize better in a weird way, to cultivate a friendliness with that space. And nature can help a lot, even just being in a park, birds, sunbeams, good friends. Nicholas. Oh, wait, there was another hand before that somebody who hadn't.
Brandon had his hand up. Brandon, did you want to hop in here?
No, you guys are good. I retracted it. Maybe I'll come back.
Retracted the hand.
At the very beginning of our conversation, you mentioned normies. And I know that for people outside of even some of these communities, they're like, huh, what? There is definitely that aspect the media is going to get this wrong. They're going to get the underlying concepts wrong. They're going to get the facts wrong. They're going to make a bigger mess of things. Is there, instead of looking at outreach towards those who are already in QAnon, is there a way to outreach, before people find there, or when they're at that before they get that aha moment, but when they're starting to look behind the curtain, is there an opportunity there, with some of these communities and groups to be like, here is some explanation for the normies, outreach that way, the opposite way.
Sure. I mean, I think that that's happening a lot. I mean, the good side of YouTube is like that. I mean, there's actually a lot of great content on there. I don't go hunting for it because it's hard to find the gold in the chaff, but luckily I have a lot of, people who are more diligent than me, and they send me some stuff, and there's really great material. And even things that I don't necessarily love that are helpful for this, like there's some of the kind of rationalist, what do they call it? Less wrong kind of stuff that while their ultimate worldview I find a bit much or even kind of claustrophobic and wrong, is not a bad bit of medicine for people these days. I mean, I think that we definitely, in that, if we're always kind of balancing between extremes, we're definitely in a time where we need more attractive and infectious forms of critical thinking, reason, contextualization, why do I believe this? So ideas about confirmation bias, for example, which in a way Logan had talked about in terms of how we just fulfill our own beliefs, and that's a very, very fundamental part of human beings. I don't think that thinking in terms of biases is enough to understand the richness of psychology by any means, but it's not a bad thing to, throw into your mix. And so I do think that that's part of what the information war is that you try to really clarify and put out there where you're coming from for others. And that might be the media, it might be people just like messing around, it might be talking back to other things that are wrong. And that's like some of the good work we do, is you just go out there and you have to do, you do it on YouTube, you do it on Instagram, you try to figure out how does that language work, and how do you put in the one drop? How do you represent, like in a TikTok, like one critical move, like something goes da 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 da, like you set up a game, like, wow, did you read that thing? And I found that other thing, and I go, wow, really? And then you go, that sounds like bullshit. Or, I'm going to ask the person I know who actually knows about that field, and whatever it is, and it just work. It's just like, yeah, that might be your calling to figure out ways to do that. I mean, you've asked about it a couple of times, so I have a feeling that you're just trying to figure out what you do and where you do it. And it's hard. There's no easy answer, man. It's not like, sometimes I feel like, well, I'm not on TikTok, I should just shut up. Who cares? I'm just like talking to the crowd or whatever. Or, I mean, it's so hard to know where the lever is. We don't know. Nobody knows where the lever is. And we can't afford to blanket. We can only just do our work or get really specific about a particular problem, a particular error that gets made regularly about something you care about, and really hone in on that one thing, and then just be very specific and targeted about it, and get it out there the way that all this other stuff gets out there. All righty. I think we're good.
I think Jacqueline has one last question. I think we'll be wrapping things up after that, I believe.
Great.
Hi. Well, I think what Q does so well is they don't reject anyone. In the religious sphere, if you believe in evolution, you can't be one of us. In the metaphysical sphere, if you believe in Western medicine, you can't be one of us. In the medical sphere, if you believe in God, you can't be one of us. But with Q, people always seem to have a home.
Yeah.
Because we don't necessarily believe in Pizzagate. Well, that's okay. We have this other conspiracy theory with the microchip that you can believe, where you can believe in Soros or all this. So with Q, people always seem to have a home.
Yeah.
And that's really the interesting thing to me, because like you said, it's this huge cross section of people who are being drawn to them. And a woman on Twitter who was very liberal, and she was following me. She fell so hard, so fast. And now she posts all about Q being love.
Yeah.
And it's because they are so accepting to so many different kinds of people from all different walks of life. And I think that kind of speaks to the isolation that people are feeling now too. They're drawn to this community that will take you as you are.
Yeah. No, I think that's very, 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 very well said. And it adds an emotional dimension to that sense of amalgamation that I was describing, this extraordinary ability to draw in all these contradictory forces. Because you used to, in the old days, you think about the right wing, those are the guys who said that we have the truth, it's Jesus and Wall Street, and it's like, now it's just everything, everything. But there's a cost, or the way the ticket you buy to get in that game, that party, is that there is a capital E evil. There's got to be a real evil, like deep cosmic satanic evil, because it's not just ordinary bad people. That doesn't do it. That's not going to unify people. It has to be of a supernatural order. And I think one of the elephants in the room, we didn't really talk about it tonight, most of the discourse around it, it just pokes at it, which is all I did by saying Manichaean, good on one side, bad on the other. It doesn't really deal with the elephant, and the elephant is evil. Like, doesn't mean anything. Is there just bad and things that are more bad and less bad? Oh wait, if there is evil, what is that? And have we reached a point where society, or at least the way people see society, has become so toxic, and there's so much darkness on the horizon that you can't, the elephant's trumpeting again? Like, maybe, we could even get through, okay, maybe the Nazis were evil, but the communists, they were just bad. Like, Stalin was bad. Evil, okay, maybe he was evil, but we don't have to really deal with it. But now it's like the big cosmic mythopoetic dimension is in the picture, and we don't really know how to deal with it. We don't have sophisticated religious or esoteric ways of dealing with it, which we have historically, because everybody's just not used to thinking about it. So they go for the cartoon evil, which has this extra feature of, as long as you recognize that, fist bump, we're all in it together, because you need to be in it against something. And how do we do that without being against something? Or if that something is just like, scary climate changes, that doesn't really do it for most people's imaginations. So, but thanks to that point, that whole thing, Q is love. Like, wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have one last question from Colin, and then I believe.
Right. Whoa, the buzz. Hey, Colin, you want to type?
I think the NSA is jamming you, Colin. They don't want, You want to type it out?
You can type it. That's so funny. It's like, it sounds like what does that sound like?
It sounds like what we're hearing from Mars.
Yeah.
Just kind of that low hum.
Oh, you're right.
Anton Wilson, yay. You seeing this in the chat, Eric?
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and mute you, Colin, while you type. So,
yeah, sure. I'll just say a little bit about it, because I kind of alluded to it before, and people who didn't know about it, you can read my account or other accounts that Robert Anton Wilson, when he wrote Illuminatus, was very influenced by a very underground, tiny little group that did emerge here in California, down in Downey in the late 1950s, called Discordianism. There was really just a couple of guys and later a few more people, including a couple of women, who basically invented a fake parody religion full of Zen pranks. So they were sort of anarchist, prankster, hippie goofballs who had a lot of fun playing on the edge of, are we serious or are we joking? And that's the kind of material that can go multiple ways. So in their hands, it was mostly pretty light. And that same kind of thing is now used, especially on the right, the alt-right, to disguise, hardcore racism or nationalism, where it's like, well, I've just made a joke. I'm not serious. What do you think? Oh, you think I'm serious? Well, what's your problem? That kind of, with the way that irony can be a dodge. But back then, that's what they were, just having fun with it. And the kind of political form that Discordianism took was this Operation Mindfuck, which it's a long backstory, probably not worth going into right now. But essentially, the idea was that some of the people in the group were being hounded for their association with, of all things, the assassination of JFK. And so they decided to prank one of the offices that was pursuing him, one of whose members believed in the Illuminati, by pretending that the Illuminati were real and starting to send messages as if the Illuminati were real. And that kind of got the snowball rolling, where the idea was Operation Mindfuck is to basically prank people for political reasons. So in our contemporary moment, we have a very different take on that than we would have even 10 years ago if we had been talking about this. And so what looked initially like kind of hard hippie fun looks a little bit more ominous in light of the recognition this can be used in multiple directions and for multiple ends. So in a way, a kind of part of me wishes we could come up with another version of Operation Mindfuck, where we start to have fun again, to prank and be playful and be joking and bring humor back into the picture of political activism, which is completely devoid of on the left. It's the right that's countercultural now. It's the right that's kind of funny. Not all of it by any means, but the alt-right, they're funny, or not funny to me necessarily, but they're going for humor. And some of it is actually kind of funny. And it's the left that's extremely serious, and the environment is extremely serious. Oh my God, how are we gonna motivate people to love each other beyond their identities without some kind of humor in it? I don't know. I don't see the way. So that's the thread of Operation Mindfuck that I'd like to keep with us, is a certain sense of openness, possibility, play, humor, a certain kind of, we're all in it together. And to kind of carry that forward, and maybe less of the full mindfuck, because we're all a little mindfuck these days, and we don't need much more of that. Oh boy. Okay. I think I'm mindfucked.
Erik, you're the best. Thank you so much. What I love about what you did tonight, and what you always do in your work, is you refuse to tie it up in an epistemic closure. And so now here's what we must do. And so now here's what's true. You love the liminal zone, and thank God for that, because that's where we all are. Whether we know it or like it or not, we're in this liminal zone. We don't need to talk about meta-narratives, closure. Everything's open. All the secrets are out. I love, love, love your work and appreciate it so much. Thank you, Nicholas, for hosting and interviewing Erik with terrific questions. And this has just been amazing. And I'll just say one thing in closing, that there are these epiphanies, these moments of grace and the sacred, and this is one of them. Had everything stayed the same, this group of people would not have been together tonight having this discussion. So Eric, these people are not in Los Angeles, most of them.
Yeah.
Jacqueline's in New Jersey. Nicholas is in, what is that country you live in? Wisconsin or something?
Frozen Midwest.
Yeah, okay. Back east, we call it, meaning it's not California. Yeah. Erik does a lot of writing. It's really good writing. It's provocative, but also it's sober and measured too, which is a rare combination. So, Erik, you're the best. Thank you. Let's look forward to having you on campus.
Yeah.
At some point.
All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. This was a lot of fun. Have a good evening.
All right.